So we have one more committee for it to go through, and then we will be on debate this afternoon. There was no discussion.
Oh,
We just, there were no votes, yes votes. I think everyone's waiting for the floor. Many of the changes were just clarifying, we had intended, a lot of chapter amendments, that's what they are. They're technical, they're clarifying. So most of them were in that category, I would say. Then there were some added safeguards and some added restrictions as well. Those are, with the exception of one, they exist in other states' models. We just chose initially not to include them, and the governor chose to include them. So So the original bill allowed for a mental health visit if either the presiding doctor or the consulting doctor thought it was important to get a mental health evaluation. If they thought the person potentially didn't have medical competency to make those decisions. The governor changed it to what is used in Hawaii, which is an automatic visit to a mental health professional. I would imagine that there will be some psychologists and psychiatrists that will feel very comfortable. No one, end of life doctors, medical doctors, not psychiatrists, are very well trained also in having those conversations and making sure someone's competent to decide on treatment plans and so forth. But this is just, yet one more doctor who I think will then specialize in this kind of thing for purposes of signing off on the visit. So it's actually almost the opposite, frankly. If a doctor chooses not to participate in medical aid in dying, or the person takes the medical aid in dying in the presence of the doctor is not liable and not subject to criminal penalties, no matter which direction they go in.
They could possibly.
So what that's about is it's ensuring that patients learn about other end of dying options like hospice care and all end of life options. So if a doctor who's treating someone doesn't feel competent to talk about those things, they're required now in the new bill, in the governor's chapter amendment, to make sure that they get referral to someone who can talk about all those end of life options. The governor just felt that was an additional safeguard. I could argue both sides. Obviously today I'm going to argue the side of including it, but it does allow for a waiver, and the waiver gives everyone comfort that if someone is dying and it's very immediate, the doctor has the ability to waive those 5 days. Within their scope of practice, they're already trained to deal with, again, end of life issues and talking about treatment options. And this is one of those in that category. So all but 3 states have a residency requirement. There were 2 federal court cases which struck down the residency requirement. That was in Vermont and Oregon. So, you know, we could, and New Jersey's in the middle of a court case now. So it may get struck down. It may not, you know, it depends on if someone goes to court. But those are, but the governor wanted to ensure that New Yorkers were availing themselves of this and that others did not. So there's no mention of a certain parameter, but I would equate it to Medicaid, another health benefit that where there's a residency requirement in the law. And so I looked up what they do for that to prove residency. And in order to prove you're a resident, you can show a rent stub. You can show mail being mailed to your house, a utility bill, something in your name that shows that you're actually living in New York. That's within the last 6 months.
Okay.
So if somebody, for example, we had a colleague whose son relocated to go to Sloan, and he was living in Manhattan, and he could show that he was living there, he would qualify. Any provider can opt out. So it's not just any provider could opt out. We know that the religious providers are going to opt out, but any provider could opt out of care, of doing this. You know, if you have terminal illness and you decide you want to talk about this as an option for yourself, you know, and you said to your provider, I want medical aid in dying, then they would say, well, I don't believe in that. I am a religious person. I will not participate. But again, because of the requirement that they refer someone to someone who can talk about it, you know, that's what would happen in that instance. Yes, there's rules and regs that, and we heard from some of the hospitals, like Sloan, for example, who see a lot of cancer patients and know that they're going to be hearing about this more so than other hospitals. They felt that they needed time to put their protocols in place. I would say that, you know, when I first started this process, there were 3 states that allowed for medical aid in dying. Now, we will be I think the 12th state, and there will, or 13th state maybe.
Yeah.
And there'll be 14 altogether jurisdictions because Washington, D.C. And all of them are similar in their model. And New York is very close, almost identical to, there are provisions identically to each of them, right? There's been no change in the 30 years that we now have, you know, 14 states potentially doing this. There's been no change. You know, people feared that we'd look like Canada. Canada is a different model. Europe, different model. It's not what we have done in the United States. So New York looks like the rest of the United States. So I think, you know, I'm certainly not putting in a bill. And let me tell you, it took me 10 years to get this. So if somebody else wants to file something to expand it, I don't know in which direction, because assuming, some of the restrictions don't present obstacles that we want to get over. But again, those restrictions are not identical in every state. So we could get rid of one or two of those. We didn't have in the original bill, I would argue. But at the same time, to allow doctors to actually assist someone, we don't allow that. That's something they do allow in Canada. Canada doesn't limit it to terminal patients. We, in every place, limit it to terminal patients. So there's just no reason to believe that this is going to go beyond where we are. So I feel like my sister is looking over. What I didn't know until very recently when I looked at the bill is that the formal introduction was a year to the date that she died. This month would have been her birthday in a couple of weeks. The motivation, the continued motivation, is when you watch someone die a horrific death, who their death wish was to have loved ones around them when they died. Death wish. Who would not fight to honor that? And that was my sister's death wish. And I can tell you that she died a very painful death. And she wasn't completely alone, but she wasn't with everybody who she wanted there. Thank you.